Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Inclusion Re-Engineered. My name is Hannah Awonuga. I am the founder and CEO of Illume Executive Consulting and the Inclusive Foundations Program, an organization built to help high growth organizations build cultures where people thrive and not just survive. I am so glad to be here with you again. To everyone who came to the last one, thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are talking about pay gap. And I have to say, we are not going with all of the logistical details to how you get to a pay gap. What we want to talk about is what influences your pay gap, how you can actually put actions in to close the pay gap, but also to drive real inclusion in your organization, and really think about what are some of the challenges that organizations face when they are thinking about representation, pay gap, inclusion in their organization. I am here with a very special guest, a very, very special guest, Shelley Bishton, who is a multi-award winner, inclusion, cultural and transformation leader with over 20 years experiences focused on driving cultural change in organizations and leading multi-million-pound partnerships. Shelley, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hi, I love that intro.
I love intro, you know, when people intro me, I'm like, oh, was that me?
I know, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, who's that?
So look, we've had several conversations, right, about all sorts of things. And the last year has been so interesting in terms of just really thinking about, you know, what is it that's the bottleneck? What is it that's stopping organizations from really driving change? And probably for us both, a few years ago, we'd probably have to be a bit temperament in how we talk about these things. But now we can say it all. And so, you know, we got talking about pay gap, and we got talking about, you know, what are some of the challenges that we see in organizations. We've both worked in kind of large corporate organizations. We've really seen actually how organizations address and approach pay gap. And so I suppose my first question to you is kind of, what do you think is the challenge that comes with organizations when it comes to pay gap, reporting, data? You know, what do you think are some of the challenges that organizations are facing?
Well, I think I'm really excited to see this year's pay gap report and to see if that has been an impact on the last year. As we've spoken about, there has been so many shifts. I mean, one of the conversations we've had is we've felt like there's been not as much focus on International Women's Day this year. You know, there hasn't been as much hype. There hasn't been as many conversations around it. So is that shift going to show in the data itself, which will be very interesting to know. I think as well, just thinking about the recent articles that came out, we're not going to hit the gender pay gap until 2030. It's so depressing. And, you know, was it on the 15th of February, they said women had basically worked for free this year. If you think about it in actual literal terms. So I think, you know, there is so much further to go. I think probably being on the inside and having to do the gender pay gap, and it's important, right? It's a very important document, and it's something that you have to do now since 2017, which is obviously the most important part of it. But I still feel like the biggest problem with it is it just feels like a report that you have to produce data for. Everyone gets this data, everyone is really focused on getting that report done. But actually, what's the actions that come out of that report? Where's the accountability? And is anyone holding you to account? It's not just a pretty statement. It's not just like a pretty report that says, I mean, it could say anything really, because no one's actually saying, why haven't you progressed? Or what are the reasons that you can see that you haven't seen any shift in middle management? So I think the biggest problem with the report is it's brilliant to have it.
Yeah.
It's like a photograph of what is happening in the company right now. The problem with it is it doesn't actually say, what are you going to be doing next to address the gap?
I love that. And you're so right, because at the moment, it still feels like a regulatory requirement. And if you are a 250 staff organization, you now have to produce a pay gap. And I suppose some of the things that even what you're saying resonates with me, there's no accountability. So, you could be, a mid-sized business, high growth business. All of a sudden now you're at 300 staff. Now you have to pay, report on the pay gap. And so you just submit the numbers. And for me, the challenge there is that no one is holding you accountable. Nobody is asking you why there's a disparity unless you have the governance structure within the organization. And so that's something, that's something we talked about. That's something we're supporting some clients with is, how do you make your inclusion council, your ESG council, your board accountable for these numbers so that you're not only just submitting it, but somebody is holding you accountable. When I have had to support or lead the pay gap, I remember thinking, okay, I've got to take this to board, and they're going to ask me questions. And so how do I answer them questions? The challenge I think sometimes also is that we think that we own it as heads of DEI, but actually it has to be the business, right? I don't know what you think about that, but the accountability should sit with the business. It
has to sit with the business. And I think you're right. And then you feel that pressure as the head of DEI to be accountable for what's in that report. But ultimately, there is so much, it's so complex what goes into that report. And I think to your point, going and presenting to the board, I think being really honest, the board just want to hear that you're doing okay. They just want to hear, are we going to look okay? Like, what does this act, so then you're almost just trying to answer to them to say it's okay. But actually, really, you need proper cadence throughout the year to say, how are we tracking against what we said? Where's our quarterly review on the gender pay gap report? It's almost, I doubt that exists. I doubt that exists. And that's the thing that it needs. That needs to be a document that is a stake in the ground. And then you're saying every quarter with the board, with the commercial teams, because of course it's tied to pay, it's tied to bonuses, it's tied to progression. So it's like, what is everybody doing within their teams to address this discrepancy? And I think that's probably where the problem happens. It just becomes a report once a year that everyone fusses over and the head of DEI ends up in a tizzy about,
Yeah. I completely agree, because I even really appreciate your point around the commercial side to it and involving the commercial team, because when you start to look at why the gaps are there, and people sometimes get this mixed up with pay gap and fair pay. This isn't about, two people are doing the same job and you're paying men more than women. This is about representation. And so if you don't have senior women in your business, or Black people, or people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, or disabled people, like if we think about what the government's doing and the introduction to ethnicity pay gap and the disability pay gap, it is going to be about how people progress in your organization. And so if your commercial teams, if your leaders, if your executive teams don't understand that their decisions, their hiring decisions, has a huge impact on how the pay gap is created, then actually the ownership will always sit with you. And that's why cultural governance is one of our pillars, because it's so important. When I go around and I talk to businesses now, and even when you are speaking to leaders in your different fields, I know they're saying, well, we've got this council, or and it's great for the ERGs, but I just think that the councils and the government, the governance and the committees could be so much stronger in terms of holding businesses accountable.
And also transparency on the data, right? Because the data can tell a story, and it can tell quite a simple story. But one thing, and from my experience, is when you drill down into the data, and that's what I think has to be done, when you really start looking at, we did a piece of work in one of my roles where we went and we drilled down and we looked at who was getting promotions, who was getting bonuses and why. And when you really start looking at that data, it can be quite uncomfortable. And that's where I think the change really happens. And that's where I think every team will work in silo, and they're just doing their own hiring. They're working out their own bonus structures. Actually, if you drill into that and you say, can you just show exactly what you've done, even in a basic sense? Who have you promoted? Why have you promoted? What gender are they? What ethnicity are they? And you start to show that back. people are surprised at their decisions and their choices because they just see these things as in isolation. But actually, you start to see the patterns and the trends. Well, why are you always making that decision? Why is that person always given less of a bonus? And so I think the transparency on the data and also the individual accountability for all those departments, to your point, and then looking at that as a whole piece, and everyone has a responsibility on that, and starts to see the trends across all of them. Because you might be just thinking you're making an isolated decision, but actually, if everyone's making those same isolated decisions, then that's where the problem happens. And it's like, actually, it needs to be a consensus, but an identification that you are making those decisions for whatever reason, but being aware of that. And the awareness, I don't think, is there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you just think about the leadership journey, right? So you become a leader, and then usually the reason why you've become a leader is because you're high performing. So maybe you're a great salesperson, or you've done you've demonstrated that you're able to now lead a team. So then, if you don't have the right leadership development or leadership training, you hire in your image because you want to perform, right? You've got a performance mindset, usually where that leadership comes from. And so therefore your decisions are always going to have a bias to what feels comfortable to you. And don't get me wrong, because I think it's so important to say, we're not saying, and no pay gap, the pay gap is not suggesting that you just put women into senior positions because they are women. I don't want you to hire me because I'm Black. I don't want you to hire me because I'm a woman. I want to be hired on merit. But I also want the comfort of knowing that your organization recognizes that there is a disparity. So, and that's what equity is, right? Equity is recognizing that I might need something different from you, Shelley, right? Like we might come from two different backgrounds. You might have come from a private school. I might have come from low socioeconomic background. So even as two Black women, we might need something different. That's equity. It's not about race in any way. It's about recognizing the disparities. And so when you start to apply that to pay gap, it's about recognizing that if your most senior people, if your board and your executive teams and all your leaders and your high performers, I don't think we should forget about them, because pay gap is driven by the money that you earn and your bonuses that you earn. So if all your high performers are men, in this case, we're talking about gender pay gap, then your pay gap will be large, because what we're saying is that the high performers earn the most money, and so therefore that's where the pay goes. There's something really important about sitting back and looking at your business, looking at who gets the clients, who gets the golden clients, who gets the good jobs, who gets the stretch opportunities. And then also, one thing I see in talent mapping is also asking the hard questions. Why did you say that John is passionate and energetic, but then you said that, Sally is, a bit too ambitious? What is the disparity in language there? Because that all matters, right? It all matters. But look,
you're talking about power though as well, aren't you? Talking like power and systems, and who's got the power in these systems. Like if you talk about progression, because I think the most interesting thing about the data is the pay gap widens the older you get. So if you look at younger people coming into the industries, predominantly, obviously this is generalization, the gap's not that big. As we progress as women through the system, then it widens. But what's that saying about the system and who it's built for? And it's definitely not built for women. And we know, we can literally sit here and talk about the reasons why, but it's like, so the systems of power have decided as we progress through the business, we're not as valuable and we shouldn't be paid as much. That's one of the big fundamental problems.
Tell me more about that. I love that. No, because wait, what? Now my age after everything. So tell me more. Where is that thinking coming from?
So in the recent report that just came out, which said we're going to wait till 30 years, till 2030, so 30 years before we close the gap. Some of the most interesting data in it just showed as we get older, so between 40 and 59, it starts to get really heavily higher.
Wow.
As soon as we get to 50, you might as well write us off. Honestly, I think
write us off.
No, but in terms of the way this system is structured at the moment, the way power is structured at the moment, and what is happening, and within that, and we know women, we have children, we obviously have more caring responsibilities. menopause happens, like all these things. So all of a sudden the power structures, which aren't designed to cater for the fact that we're evolving, are dismissing us, and the pay gap widens.
And that is why you can't, that's why when people say, okay, we're just going to focus on inclusion, or we're just going to focus on diversity, you actually cannot, if you understand what you're doing, you can't do you can't do one without the other. Because if you just decide that, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on women, we're going to put some women through some program, and we're going to put them into these positions, and you still expect to go to the golf course, you still expect like 12-hour days, you still expect that, no, you can't go to pick up your child. If you still have the kind of patriarchy in terms of the patriarchic approaches that you've had in the past, it just won't work for women. And also you see that women won't apply, because we do want to be ambitious, we want to be progressive, we want to progress in our careers. That isn't the question. The question isn't, are women up for it? It's, is the environment inclusive enough for us to thrive?
Exactly. Who's designed that system, and has it enabled everyone to have an opportunity to thrive, or is it just serving a certain type of person?
And then the question is, well, what is the role of leaders? What is the role of allies? What is the role of sponsors? Because I have always said that allyship and sponsorship are active roles. They are not, just going to events and showing up and opening keynotes and all these great things. They're great. But the real action of a sponsor, the real action of a leader who wants to change their business, is that they ask the hard questions, is that they really sit back and think, who is missing from this decision-making table? How are we getting the voices in? And all of this, believe it or not, people won't associate what we're talking about with pay gap, because pay gap is a data report. They're like, we've done it, we're compliant. If you are looking at your data, if you're looking at your pay gap report in December for April, it's too late.
Exactly. And that is, I'm being very frank, that is what happens. January even. That is exactly what happens, and that is the problem. And you're right about sponsorship. And I also think there needs to be some stronger empathy and understanding of the impact to women. And it's like, how do you make, I'm going to be really honest, men lean into it? Why should there be this discrepancy? Do you want your daughter to grow up and not be paid 2 months of every year just because she's a woman? Like, honestly, why would we want that? So I think it's accountability, but it's also a real understanding of empathy and understanding that the power systems have been built to structure and support only certain types of people.
I completely agree. I suppose, and you make a really good point. Why should people care?
Why should they care? And they have to.
They do have to. Morally, they have to, right? But I do sit there sometimes thinking, why do you care? Like, you're there, you're in good positions, you are earning, your colleagues, your peers are all earning money. Why do you care? Like, this has to be linked back to business strategy, commercial outcomes, the growth of the business, the future of the business, future-proofing the business. It can't just be that, because you haven't got women in your team. Nobody cares. Like, and I'm being honest.
It's I used to say this. I used to say to my team, you can't make people care. Like, you can't force someone to care, but you can make them care, to your point, by making it hit their bottom line.
Absolutely. Because we're all here to do a job, right? So you care about the work. You care about the bonus. You care about the business. If you are a senior leader, me and you are both directors, when you get to them senior positions, you care about the growth of the business.
Absolutely.
You have to link this work to the growth of the business. And there's so much research out there. And I don't really quote the McKinsey 35%, better at boards now, because people are like, well, it's been a couple of years now. Are we 35% better? They're rightfully so to challenge. But what I would say is, if you groupthink is real, that is a real thing. So if you do not have people who are different from you from a gender perspective, culture, background, then you are not getting the best outcome. You're not getting people that are going to challenge you. You're not going to get people that are saying, not quite sure about that. And you need that. You need that in your business. So look, I'm conscious of time. Listen, Shelley, me and you can talk for.
I know.
We can talk for ages. But anyway,
yes.
What should businesses be doing? Let's go to practical tips. When we looked at the data in terms of how many people are reaching out or watching this, it's HR, it's D&I, it's leaders, they're founders as well. So really exciting that we've got that audience. I'll give two things, you give two things. You go first. What are two things you think organizations should be doing?
I think if you're a smaller organization as well, which is something that we're focusing on, you've got a real opportunity to start from scratch and build it upwards. And I think that's what's exciting right now, because you've got so much information around. Obviously, you've got to do the report now if you're 250, but there is so much opportunity for you to create something really accountable, sustainable. In terms of things that you can do, I think some of the problem with all of this, it feels so vast and so huge and so big.
Yeah.
Where on earth do you start with something like this? And I think you've just got to think of some real quick things that you could activate. So an idea I was thinking about, so when I was at News UK, we did this thing where we wanted to have a look at the gender of guests coming on on our broadcast stations, because we wanted to see if there was a skew more to male or female. We didn't know because we weren't tracking the information. So we just started to track that information. So we just got the producers to write down whether or not it was a male or female guest who came on the show. All of a sudden, of course, we saw a skew in the data. Great, so we've got the data now. But because we were asking people to simply track it every single month, put that in a spreadsheet, really simple spreadsheet, X number of men, X number of women, the numbers started to change.
Wow.
Because people were actually thinking about it, identifying it, and then also having to report on it, which means there's accountability. People look at the data. So I think something really simple that could happen is you do a quarterly dip into, say, for example, it's on bonuses. Who got bonuses this month in our teams? And just literally look, male, female, how much did they get and why? Start reporting on that. All departments come together as a group to have a look at that data. I would almost guarantee there would be a shift in behavior, because people would start to understand that they might not even realize there is bias in their behaviors. And also they'd start to realize they need to be accountable to this whole group and people. And there needs to be someone like me or you there going, why is that?
Why did that happen?
Yeah, why is that? And can we see the trends? Because then I think, because that's the thing, accountability is a really important thing to consciousness. So I think just raising people's consciousness and understanding of some of the trends that are happening in their business is something. Obviously that's one thing, but
no, I was going to say accountability as well. Where does the accountability sit? It can't sit with HR, it can't sit with DEI. So your leader, your founder, your business, your CEO should want to know this number. Because I know when my senior partner or my chair or my CEO asked me, it made me sit up. I was like, okay, right, we need to get ready. So I think there's real senior leadership, accountability and ownership of what that number is and why it is. I also think it's important around allocation of work.
Yes.
I think that at the moment it's like, oh, you did a good piece of work before, so I'll give you another piece. I think that there needs to be some real systemic processes put in place in terms of who gets them kind of senior roles, who gets the big stretch opportunities, because actually for me that's where the gap is. If you constantly just keep feeding your top 5% and they all look the same, sound the same, come from the same place, you will never create room for others to be in that. So I would say, look at the top 5% of your performers. Who are they? What do they do? Where are the opportunities for stretch? Accountability at CEO level as well. I think they're, for me, some of the big things as well. And then I would also say is that don't just see it as a regulatory report. When I was leading this work in-house, we actually created an action plan. So it wasn't that we were just saying, right, we're just going to post it and hope that nobody goes to check it. It's a public record. We actually put a name to it. We had an accountable executive from the board who owned it, and we published an action plan. And that becomes a public document. And that's almost the public become who we are accountable to.
That's
and
important.
That framing makes such a difference. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that public, the confrontation with actually we're going to be outed, I think that needs to happen more. I mean, I wonder if that still happens in this current climate now. I wonder if that feeling is still there. Is that still prevalent? Another thing I think needs to, another idea is also thinking about the pipeline of talent coming in through the business, like really simple things.
Yeah.
To address that. Just thinking like a 50-50 gender split is something we did. I mean, it's so simple, but it can change the dynamic of the pipeline. Also, making sure you have a man and a woman doing an interview.
Yes.
It will change the outcome of people that come into your business.
Yeah.
To your point about that top spot, that top, getting into those top positions, so many women fall off, don't they, before they get there?
Yeah.
I think is the key for that. Like, you've got to sponsor women at that point, because we've been in those roles. They are tough. If I didn't have my sponsor, he was just phenomenal. If I didn't have my sponsor, I don't think I could have survived, because it's, you need them on the board. You need them to be a sponsor from the board who's got your back, who's saying your name, who's telling you how to navigate and, how to move in those rooms and talk the language. And it's very, very lonely if you don't have that. And I think that's why women end up falling off.
So, do you know what? And that's a call to action to any woman who's on the line now who doesn't have a sponsor, because I can completely relate to that. There were a few leaders that I could call on, I could speak to, who I could say, look, this is what's happening. How do I navigate this? I also got an executive coach. That's really important. I think there's ownership on the business to create, more equitable systems, to make sure that their practices are inclusive, to make sure that their leaders are accountable. But then there's a little bit of onus on you in terms of, how do you make sure that you are ready for them senior positions, that you have the right sponsorship, that you have the right networks. And so I think it's twofold. And sometimes as organizations, we don't look at it as twofold. We look at it as either fix the women or fix the business. And actually, I think you kind of need both to be able to do that. So look, thank you. I appreciate you so much. I know you've got a big day today as well. So thank you so much for giving me.
It's brilliant what you're doing.
Honestly, we could have literally been speaking for like hours. But I think the crux is that, if you're new, if you're a growing business, if you're a high growth business and you've just met that 250 threshold, you can actually inform change today. You can actually start to use this as a way, as a mechanism to really understand what's happening in your business. So there's that. And then I think for the larger organizations, and we know that we have a really good population of large businesses on here as well. I would say that you can use your pay gap as a driver to get change, right? As a leader, you can ask harder questions, and you can make people accountable, and you should be held accountable for this as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you. It's gone so quick.
It's gone so fast. I can't believe that's been 30 minutes.
I know, but it has.
Make it longer next time,
Yes. But people are in the middle of their days, so I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you to everyone who's listening. Please join us next month is Women's Month. International Women's Day is on the 8th of March. And so we will be back at the end of March to talk all things kind of sponsorship, mentorship, and male allyship. So I'm really excited about that one.
Love it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.